Well, as you may be aware, Pete Hegseth called 800 generals and admirals, basically every single flag officer and 1-star and above across the entire U.S. military, to show up today in Quantico, Virginia. Now, there was no clear understanding as to what the hell this was about. Was it a loyalty pledge? Was it a speech? Was it something else? But of course, it was completely ominous given the fact that many of these people are in dangerous areas that are near conflict zones and they need to be on the job and they would have to fly from around the world. And on top of that, someone of this rank doesn't just come alone, they have an entire staff. So you're talking about thousands of people gathering in Virginia today with little notice, apparently for no reason. Well, there was no loyalty test, there was no Joseph Stalin moment, and we can be grateful for that. However, the speech did have some ridiculous and somewhat dangerous moments that portend things for the future, which are not very positive. So I wanted to address the main topics that were spoken about today and give you my thoughts as someone with military and combat experience. Now, let's start with Donald Trump. And the thing I'm going to do for you, because it's Monday and I love you, I'm not going to make you listen to these people actually talk. I've got transcripts, so if we're going to look at what they said, I'll respond. Hopefully this is edifying in some way. First thing, Donald Trump, and I told Pete that we should use some of these dangerous cities as training grounds for our military. National Guard, but military, because we're going into Chicago very soon. That's a big city with an incompetent governor, stupid governor. Okay, so this is very, very bad, all right? Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth were found to have directed an illegal, basically, occupation of Los Angeles by a federal district court recently after a trial after discovery. Not an emergency hearing, but something that was developed over a period of months where everybody had an opportunity to gather their witnesses and their evidence, come into court and battle in the crucible of litigation. And what the court found specifically was there was a violation of the Posse Comitatus Act, which is a very important statute passed pursuant to Congress's sole authority under the Insurrection Clause. Look that up, you may not have heard of it. The Insurrection Clause, which gives Congress the exclusive authority to raise militias to deal with and quell rebellions. Now, the same thing's holding true in Chicago. The same thing's holding true in Portland. And he's only going to Democratic cities, which on top of the Posse Comitatus Act would be a violation probably of equal protection. You cannot discriminate in how you exercise authority under any branch of government based upon someone's religious, political beliefs, race, gender, or things that are protected categories. But that's exactly what Donald Trump is doing and exactly what he's admitting here. Secondly, you cannot use civilian areas as training grounds. I mean, in the military, in the infantry, you are taught to exercise the maximum amount of lawful violence humanly possible. You destroy an entire area with artillery, with preparatory fires, with suppressing machine gun fire, with overhead glide bombs from aviation, because that will protect the infantry as they move in. The dichotomy between law enforcement and military force is a huge gap. That's not something that you can mix the two. And to say you're going to use civilian areas for training the military means you're either training the military and law enforcement or you're training the military to engage in blatant war crimes. There's no two ways about it. So very dangerous, very illuminating in a bad way. Additionally, he says, only in recent decades did politicians somehow come to believe that our job is to police the far reaches of Kenya and Somalia while America is under invasion from within. We're under invasion from within. No different from a foreign enemy, but much more difficult in many ways because they don't wear uniforms. Okay, again, this is a completely fascistic statement for him to say this. What do you mean invasion from within? He's described immigration as an invasion, but that's coming from the outside. That's an inaccurate description. But from within, this is exactly straight from the brain of Stephen Miller, and this is the kind of thing that you have seen in the apartheid South African regime, in Stalin's Russia and Putin's Russia, in all kinds of dictatorships across history that we consider to be evil, wrong, and bad, that ultimately led to lots of innocent people getting killed. Very dangerous, and open your eyes. It's right there. Additionally, to say that it's no different to have an invasion from within when you have a city like Portland, which, like any big city, of course it's going to have crime. You have human beings in a confined area. I mean, confined meaning in a big city, in an urban environment. I better say it like that. There's going to be crime. But to say that's the same as 9/11, to say that's the same as Pearl Harbor, is outrageous. It's stupid. It doesn't hold up. It makes no sense. Then he gets to the battleship thing, but it's something we're actually considering. The concept of a battleship. Nice 6-inch side, solid steel, not aluminum. Okay, battleships are obsolete. The main guns, like a 16-inch gun on a battleship, can shoot around 25 miles. That is within the range of most 155 tube artillery, especially for using, base bleed, rocket-assisted projectiles. They can go way farther than that. So you're going to put a ship whose main armament is within the range of coastal guns, of artillery that can just wheel up and fire away, to say nothing of the range of anti-ship missiles, which are hundreds of miles. That's the reason that even though they took Iowa-class battleships and they recommissioned them during Desert Storm, they didn't use their guns that much. They did once they had had preparatory fires, again, with, Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles, which we outfitted these battleships with. Only then could they get close enough to shoot when they destroyed everything on shore already. The only way you're going to be able to recommission a battleship is if you basically turn it into a missile carrier, which is what we have cruisers and destroyers for right now. And it's just spending a lot of money for something that's obsolete, that'll be no better than what we have. Costs more to operate, it's heavier, costs more fuel, to say nothing of the cost of putting it back into service. Just ridiculous, stupid. Just wanted to point out how utterly incomprehensible this is. Next, and from the cavalry that tamed the Great Plains to the ferocious, unyielding power of Patton, Bradley, and the great General Douglas MacArthur, these were all great men in this effort. We're a team, and so my message to you is very simple. I am with you. Okay. I'm not going to speak on Patton or Omar Bradley, but Douglas MacArthur was terminated for violating orders. He's the guy who wanted to use nuclear weapons outside of, in a tactical environment during the Korean War. That's not somebody you want to emulate. I'm not sure, he's probably not aware of that, but again, the things that motivate his desires for how he wants to govern, how he wants to have policy, are based upon total misunderstandings of history that are huge, like massive misunderstandings, 180 degrees from reality. All right, let's get to Hegseth. And again, this was a cringeworthy speech. It was something that, as every time Hegseth talks, I just can't stand to listen to the guy because he's so insecure. And there was an article that came out today in the Daily Mail. We're going to look at some excerpts on that, which really help you understand why he called this meeting. And despite the security risks, despite the damage to readiness in all of these areas where these generals and admirals had to come from, despite the security risk of having all these people in one area, he did it basically because of those same failings in self-esteem and lack of self-confidence and insecurity. So let's get to what he talked about. He says, it all starts with physical fitness and appearance. If the Secretary of War can do regular PT, so can every member of our force. And he says, if the Secretary is talking about himself in the third person. Okay, we've seen Pete Hegseth try to do PT, and we've tried to see him do pull-ups. He can't even do the same pull-ups. He can't do a complete pull-up, and he doesn't do as many as Robert F. Kennedy, who, even though he's like on steroids and human growth hormone, the guy's a lot older than him. On top of that, when I saw him wearing a plate carrier and he was doing push-ups, he had no damn plates in his plate carrier. He can't do them. That's a lie. The definition of toxic has been turned upside down, and we're correcting that. That's why today, at my direction, we're undertaking a full review of the department's definitions of so-called toxic leadership, bullying and hazing to empower leaders to enforce standards without fear of retribution or second guessing. Okay, you know what military has the most amount of hazing and the most amount of toxic leadership? The most amount of bullying? The Russian military. Look how they've performed in Ukraine. It has been one of the worst performances and gap between expectation and reality in modern military history, like in the past several hundred years. And that's who he wants to make us more like. You may remember, I believe it was Ted Cruz if not, it was another MAGA politician who, before the war in Ukraine started, or I should say the genocidal invasion in Ukraine, they posted something saying, well, look at these Russians, look how they train, so on and so forth. Well, we saw how that turned out. Bullying and hazing, beating recruits, things of that nature do not make your military more effective. They make it less effective. It's a proven fact. Then he gets to this LGBTQ is bad, DEI, so on and so forth. Let's read it. An entire generation of generals and admirals were told that they must parrot the insane fallacy that our diversity is our strength. Of course, we know that our unity is our strength. They had to put out dizzying DEI and LGBTQI plus statements. They were told females and males are the same thing, or that males who think they're female is totally normal. Well, okay. Males who think they're female, that is actually totally normal. That is a treatable, diagnosable condition. And I'm just going to say this. There are thousands of women and thousands of LGBTQ, there's transgender people that I know personally who served with honor and distinction in Ukraine, women in combat roles. Some of the women, female drone operators who have like more kills than smallpox, okay, fit within the categories of the people that he is attacking here. Okay, in modern warfare, which is what happens in Ukraine, he's doing something that is the opposite of what's given Ukraine success. And that's what he's advocating for because he's an idiot. He doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. All right, let's get to this situation. This same holds true for today. He's talking about trying to have no more forever wars, but I'm going to give you an example of how he's actually contradicting himself. Our civilian and military leadership is chock full of veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan who say never again to nation building and nebulous end states. This clear-eyed view all the way to the White House, combined with President Trump's military buildup, blah, blah, blah. You know, if we win and will, we embrace the War Department. Okay. When he says our civilian and military leadership is chock full of veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan who will say never again to nebulous end states. All right, what the hell is Venezuela if not that description? If not nation building, if not a nebulous end state? If you're not really prepared to go into Venezuela and help with nation building in a country that has 80% poverty, a collapsed healthcare system, no vaccinations, rampant outbreaks of disease like measles, drug-resistant tuberculosis, things of that nature, which have gone across multiple countries and could reach the United States if things really go sideways, and which has, basically a collapse of any public services, then you shouldn't attack that country. That's going to cause a humanitarian catastrophe unless you're ready to deal with it, okay? That doesn't make you a warfighter. It makes you an idiot. It means that you kick over a hornet's nest and then run away when the bees start stinging. This is not how it works. And again, he's advocating for something when he's advocating against something that he's about to do. Now, let's get to this article. This first appeared in the Daily Mail, but there was some stuff about it. They had a good piece about the article in the Daily Caller. And again, when I read this, I'm like, okay, that makes sense. They said Hegseth is becoming increasingly, quote, obsessed with his own security and exhibits frantic behavior, such as fidgeting and pacing during meetings. There's a manic quality about him. Or let me rephrase, an even more manic quality, which is really saying something. Dude is crawling out of his skin, another source said. Now, when you think about that, him calling all these generals from around the world to show up, him issuing this ridiculous new Pentagon policy where you can't have, where there can be no publications by a journalist who has a Pentagon press pass, unless it's pre-approved, even if it's out of unclassified information, meaning that policy is so broad, someone could literally publish, then U.S. Navy has F-18 Super Hornets, and that would technically, even though everybody knows that, be in violation of the policy, okay? And again, calling every military official above the rank of one-star general to fly in for a meeting in Virginia, even if stationed abroad, was an example of that. Today was an example of this insecurity, this manic, behavior that he's been exhibiting, screaming at people for like the tiniest things that he's actually wrong about. This is who is in control of our military, and this is who is working with Donald Trump, who basically wants to use, schoolyards, hospitals, parks, as a place to train our military, which is supposed to be engaged in violent near-peer conflicts with Russia, China, and those kinds of countries. So, anyways, today was illuminating. Wasn't as bad as it could have been, but definitely disturbing in its own right. Thanks, guys, for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave comments. I get back to you. Take care. Have a beautiful day.